When my daughter turned 17, I locked her in a room in our own house. Every night, my wife carried a plate of food down that hallway and fed her with her own hands. Within a few minutes of eating, my daughter would fall into a sleep so deep it was like somebody had switched her off. Every morning, she woke up with raw, red marks circling her wrists, her ankles too, like somebody had tied her down in the dark and held her there all night. She didn't know what was happening to her. She didn't know who was coming into that room after she closed her eyes. I knew, but I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Because if I said the name out loud, if I told her who it really was, I was afraid I'd lose her before I ever got the chance to save her. That man was my own brother. You're gonna want to know how we got here. I understand that. Just let me tell it the way it happened, because none of it makes sense out of order. Her 17th birthday started out like the best day of her life. The whole house was up early that morning. My wife, Sarah, had made all of Emily's favorite dishes, and my brother, Richard, came into her room before breakfast with a dress he had made special, just for her. He kissed her forehead, told her this was going to be the most beautiful birthday of her life. She kissed his hand and told him he was too good to her. That's how it was with those two. Emily's whole childhood, if you asked her who she trusted most in this world, right after her mother and me, she'd say Uncle Richard, without even thinking about it. He never had a daughter of his own living close by anymore. His girls were grown, married, moved on, so somewhere along the way, Emily became his. I was quiet that morning. Sarah asked me twice if something was wrong. I told her it was nothing, just some things on my mind from work. That wasn't a lie exactly. It just wasn't the whole truth either. Evening, we had family over. House lit up. Emily floating around in that new dress, collecting hugs and congratulations from everybody who walked through the door. And then I saw Richard pull me into the corner. Our voices started low. They didn't stay that way. "Daniel, are you out of your mind?" he said, loud enough that people turned to look. "Do you understand what you're about to do? That girl means more to me than my own daughters. I won't let this happen." I told him to stay out of it, that she was my daughter, that I knew what was best for her, and he had no right to interfere in decisions that were mine to make. Emily was standing in the middle of her own birthday party, watching two men she loved come apart in front of her. No idea what any of it was about. I walked over, took her by the arm, harder than I meant to, hard enough that I saw her wince, and I started pulling her toward the back of the house, toward an old spare room off the basement stairs we hadn't used for anything but storage in years. She grabbed at my legs, crying, asking me what she'd done wrong, begging me to just tell her. I didn't look at her. Couldn't. I just kept pulling her down that hallway. Sarah stood in the corner with her hands over her face, sobbing. She didn't stop me. Emily screamed at her mother to say something, to make me stop. Sarah only cried harder. Richard came after us and grabbed my arm. "Daniel, for God's sake, she's your only daughter. How can you lock her in that room? Have you lost your mind?" I shook him off. I told him, in a voice I'd never used with my own brother before, that I knew exactly what I was doing, that he needed to go back to his part of the house. Then I put my daughter in that room, and I locked the door from the outside. I need you to understand something before I go any further. I heard her crying through that door for hours. I stood outside it more than once with my hand on the knob. I heard her fists against the wood. I heard her voice go hoarse from calling my name. There were nights I almost opened that door, and then I'd remember exactly why I couldn't, and I'd walk away. Late that first night, Emily told us afterward, she heard footsteps outside the door, then Richard's voice, low, full of what sounded like grief. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he told her through the door. "I'm completely powerless against your father. I tried everything I could to talk him out of it. He won't listen to a word I say." She begged him to try again. He sighed, and told her he didn't understand it either, that I used to dote on her more than anyone, and something had just changed in me overnight. He told her to be strong, that he'd find a way to help her, that he wouldn't leave her alone in there. To be why the time full dark came down. Emily was crying from hunger, lying flat on the floor with no strength left in her. Then the lock turned, and Sarah walked in, candle in one hand, a plate of food in the other. Emily said her mother's eyes were swollen from crying. Her face gone pale, like she had no blood left in her. Emily turned away and told her she didn't want anything from her, that she was just as cruel as I was, that a real mother would have stopped this. Sarah didn't answer. She sat down on the floor beside her, broke off a piece of food with her own hand, held it up to Emily's mouth. Emily knocked it away, said she'd rather starve to death and be done with all of us. Sarah started crying. "Please, baby, don't do this. If you don't eat, you'll make yourself sick. And I cannot stand to watch that happen." There was so much desperation in her voice that Emily couldn't refuse her anymore. She was starving anyway. She let her mother feed her, bite by bite, in silence. Within a few minutes of finishing, Emily felt her whole body go heavy. Her eyes started closing on their own, like somebody had dropped a curtain over her mind. "I can't keep my eyes open," she told her mother. Sarah wiped her tears, laid Emily's head in her lap, stroked her hair. "Sleep, baby. Rest. You need it." That was the last thing Emily remembered. She had no idea that once she went under, Sarah laid her down on that cold floor, got up, and left the room. Locking the door again behind her. It wasn't a normal sleep. It was closer to being knocked out cold, the kind where you have no sense of anything happening around you at all. The next morning, gray light came through the small vent near the ceiling, and Emily woke up in agony. Every muscle in her body ached like she'd been beaten. Her head felt like someone had taken a hammer to it, all night long. She looked down at her own hands, and froze. Deep red marks circled both wrists. Her ankles, too, like somebody had bound her, tight with rope or cord. Sometime in the night, she was terrified, and she had no idea what was happening to her, or who was doing it. That became her life. Locked in that room, in silence, day after day. Every afternoon, Richard would come stand outside the door and tell her, in that same wounded voice, that he was still trying to talk sense into me and I still wasn't budging. Every night, Sarah brought food. Emily ate. That same unnatural sleep took her under. Every morning, the same marks. She started to wonder if there was something in that room with her at night. Or worse, if she was somehow doing this to herself, in her sleep, losing her mind without even knowing it. One afternoon, standing by the vent listening to the sounds of the house, she heard Richard's voice outside on the phone with a relative. That same sad, wounded tone. Emily's mental state is getting worse by the day. She's doing strange, disturbing things. That's exactly why Daniel had to lock her in that room, so she doesn't hurt anybody. Emily said the ground fell out from under her. Was it true? Was she actually losing her mind? Something in her wouldn't accept it. Her thoughts felt clear, sharp, except during those dark hours, when that strange sleep took hold of her. After weeks of this, the same fear, the same marks, the same unanswered questions. She made up her mind to do something dangerous. She decided that whatever it cost her, she was going to stay awake one night and see, with her own eyes, exactly what was happening to her in the dark. That evening, when Sarah came in with the food, Emily pretended to be overcome with emotion, grabbed her mother's hand, started talking about old memories, cried against her shoulder. Sarah got emotional right back, pulled her into a hug, and in that moment, while her mother's attention was somewhere else entirely, Emily palmed the bite she'd been given and slid it under the edge of her bedsheet instead of swallowing it. After Sarah left, Emily hid the rest of the food, lay down on the bed, and pretended to sleep. The room was pitch dark. Same as always. She lay there holding her breath, wide awake, waiting. Time seemed to stop. Then she heard it, the heavy latch on the door, turning. Quiet, careful. Footsteps came toward the bed. Slow, deliberate. They stopped right beside her head. She felt someone leaning over her. She let her eyelids crack open, just a sliver. A thin line of moonlight from the vent fell across the face hovering above her. Her whole body went cold. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't anything supernatural in that room with her. It was Richard. The man she loved more than almost anyone else on earth. He was holding a small bottle in one hand, a cloth in the other, and a strange, sharp smell was coming off it. His face didn't have any of the warmth she'd known her whole life. There was something ugly in his eyes she'd never seen before. He opened the bottle, poured a few drops onto the cloth, pressed it close to her nose and mouth, and held it there, waiting to be sure she'd gone under. Emily held her breath with everything she had, stayed completely still. Convinced she was unconscious, he pulled the cloth away. A cruel smile crossed his face. Then he took out a thick, rough length of rope and started tying her wrists to the bed frame. No gentleness in it at all. The rope tore at her skin, and it took everything in her not to make a sound. While he tied her down, he was muttering, half to himself, half to her. Did Daniel and Sarah really think hiding you in a dark room would save you from me? Nobody gets away from me. Give it a little more time, and you'll be part of this darkness for good. Nobody will ever know how it happened. Every word landed on her like poison. Then, out of nowhere, something heavy fell somewhere outside the room. A loud crash. Richard flinched, hard. The bottle nearly slipped out of his hand. He spun toward the door, sweat breaking out on his forehead, listening to footsteps approaching from somewhere in the house. Whoever it was, it scared him enough to drop the rope, bolt for the door, and disappear into the dark hallway without finishing what he'd started. Emily lay there shaking, her wrists half-bound, her heart slamming in her chest, trying to make sense of what she'd just seen. Who had made that noise? And who had Richard been afraid enough of to run? The next day, she decided to test something else if her parents' food was really what was putting her under every night, and leaving those marks behind. She wanted to see what happened without it. For 3 days, she stopped eating what Sarah brought her. Hid it under the sheet instead. By the third day, her body was falling apart. Fever, shaking hands, her heart pounding so hard it hurt, her vision swimming. At one point she was on the floor near the door, barely conscious. And in that state, she overheard Sarah and me talking outside in the hallway. Sarah was crying, telling me she couldn't watch our daughter waste away like this anymore, that we needed to take her to the hospital, that we needed to stand up to Richard whatever it cost us, because he was going to kill our girl. That I told her she didn't understand, that Richard was more powerful, more dangerous than she realized, that if we made one wrong move, he'd have Emily declared incompetent and locked away for good. I told her the medication we'd been putting in her food every night was the only thing keeping her safe from what he was doing to her, that we had to hold on, trust the plan. Emily said that was the moment everything fell into place for her. Every piece. She spent the rest of that day waiting for evening, aching to see her mother again, this time not to push her away, but to fall at her feet and ask forgiveness. When Sarah came in that night with the plate, Emily dropped to her knees in front of her, crying, apologizing over and over for treating her mother's love like cruelty. Sarah pulled her up into her arms, kissed her forehead. There is no pain worse for a mother, she said, than watching her own child suffer like this. But we didn't have another choice. Emily asked the question I knew was coming eventually. Why hadn't we sent her somewhere safe? Why hadn't we gone to the police? Sarah told her the truth. She told her that I'd overheard Richard on the phone with some very dangerous people, saying that if I ever tried to take Emily and leave, he'd make sure it looked like an accident, one that nobody walked away from, so the whole family estate would fall to him, alone. She told her Richard had connections deep enough that the police wouldn't be able to touch him, that if we'd fought him out in the open, he could have had all 3 of us killed. She explained that locking Emily in that room had never been about punishing her. It was a performance, a way to convince Richard his plan was working, that Emily really was losing her mind so he'd feel safe and keep making mistakes. Sarah told her that I'd gotten medication from a doctor I trusted completely, that every night she'd been mixing it into Emily's food to counteract whatever chemical Richard was using on her. And then she told her the last part, that for weeks I'd been quietly building a case against my own brother, gathering proof of what he was doing, records of the chemicals he'd bought, and that I'd had a small hidden camera installed just outside the vent in that room, one that had been recording every single thing Richard did in the dark. Emily said hearing that gave her something she hadn't felt in weeks, strength. The knowledge that she wasn't alone in that room. that her father was standing between her and Richard like a wall. Even when it didn't look that way from where she was sitting. So the next time Richard came into that room with his bottle and his rope, Emily wasn't afraid anymore. She let him believe once again that the drug had worked. And while he tied her down, thinking he'd won, she lay there almost smiling in the dark, because every second of it was being recorded. Days kept passing under that same quiet tension. Richard's nerves were fraying. You could see it in his face, in the way his hands shook, in how short his temper got. He couldn't understand why his chemical wasn't finishing the job, why Emily wasn't cracking. He picked fights with me constantly, over nothing, trying to wear Sarah and me down until we gave up and had Emily committed ourselves. He'd stand outside her door and announce, loud enough for the whole house to hear, "Her condition is completely out of control now. She needs to be committed somewhere secure before she hurts somebody. She's going to destroy this family." I let him talk. I told him every time that my daughter was fine and that I didn't need anyone's advice on how to take care of her. That calm only made him angrier, and it pushed him towards something far worse. One afternoon, the house filled with unfamiliar voices. Richard had brought in two well-known psychiatrists from the city, along with several of our relatives, to stage a kind of public evaluation. A spectacle meant to end this once and for all. He stood in front of everyone, playing the grieving, worried brother, and announced that Emily's condition had become dangerous enough that keeping her in the house put the whole family at risk. He wanted the doctors to examine her, have her declared legally incompetent, so she could be committed. I fought it at first in front of everyone. But when the older relatives sided with Richard and the pressure built, I let the door open, and I walked in with the doctors myself. I watched Richard's face when that door swung open. There was a cruel little smile on it. He was certain that weeks in that room, weeks of his chemical, would have broken her completely. Instead, Emily was sitting on the edge of the bed, dressed, calm, composed, not a trace of fear on her face. Richard stopped dead in the doorway. I watched the certainty drain right out of his eyes. The doctors asked her question after question, testing her memory, her reasoning, her state of mind. She answered every one of them clearly and steadily, told them she was doing fine, that she was only in that room so she could have some peace and quiet. After almost half an hour, the doctors walked back out to the family and made their announcement. This young woman was completely sound, mentally and physically. There was no sign of any mental illness whatsoever, and any attempt to have her declared incompetent would be a serious injustice. Richard's face went white. Every relative in that room turned to look at him, wondering, for the first time out loud, why a man would go to such lengths to have a healthy young woman declared insane. That public failure broke whatever restraint he had left. He wasn't thinking clearly anymore, and he decided, whatever it cost him, he was going to finish what he'd started. Late that same night, when the house had gone completely silent, Emily's door slammed open so hard it hit the wall. Richard walked in. His eyes were bloodshot, something wild and ugly playing across his face. This time there was no bottle, no cloth. He was carrying real chains. Heavy iron, sharp links, the kind that could cut into skin. He wasn't planning to sedate her quietly this time. He meant to bind her with those chains and hurt her badly enough, physically, mentally, that she'd actually break. So that by morning, when people saw the wounds and heard her screaming, they'd believe she truly had lost her mind, and he could finally have her sent away for good. He came at her like a man hunting something. He threw the chains toward her. The cold weight of them made her shudder, and a strangled scream tore out of her throat before she could stop it. She scrambled backward. He grabbed a fistful of her hair and yanked her toward him. "Not even your coward of a father can save you tonight," he shouted. "You've ruined every plan I had. But tonight, you're going to lose your mind for good. By morning, you'll be begging for death." She was crying out in pain as he wound the chain around her wrists, her whole body shaking, certain her bones were about to break. And that's when the door blew open behind him. I came through that door with our family elders behind me, and the local police right alongside them. A detective, 2 officers. I'm not ashamed to tell you what was in me in that moment. It was every bit of a father's fury when someone threatens to hurt his child. I'd waited weeks for it, and I wasn't holding anything back. The officers moved fast. had Richard restrained and the chains torn out of his hands before he even understood what was happening. He started shouting that this was all a misunderstanding, that he'd only come in to calm her down. I told him to be quiet. Then I handed the detective a folder and a flash drive I'd been putting together for weeks. I told everyone standing in that room the truth, that my own brother, blinded by greed for the family estate, had spent months trying to hurt my daughter, and when that plan failed in front of everybody, he'd come at her with chains to try to finish the job by force. I pointed to the small camera mounted just outside the vent, the one that had recorded every single thing Richard had done in that room, night after night. I told them the folder held records of the chemicals he'd bought, and lab reports confirming exactly what was in that bottle. The room went dead silent. Every relative standing there looked at Richard like they were seeing him for the first time. The detective and his officers went through the evidence, cuffed him, led him out of the house under arrest. Whatever pride he'd walked in with was gone. He was begging for forgiveness before they even got him to the door. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. And I didn't need to. The house went quiet in a way it hadn't in weeks. I went to Emily and pulled her into my arms, and I felt her shaking against me as she cried. Sarah came in right behind me, and the three of us stood there together, holding on to each other like we hadn't in a very long time. I kissed my daughter's forehead. "I'm sorry," I told her. "Everything I did to keep you safe." The next morning, for the first time in weeks, Emily walked out of that room and into the rest of her life. It's been a few years now since all of it happened. She finished school. She runs the family property and the business her grandfather started, the one Richard nearly destroyed everything for. He's serving his sentence. There's nobody left standing beside him. Our house is quiet these days. In the good way. Emily still says the love her mother and I have for her is the thing that got her through it, and that it made her stronger, not afraid. Every now and then, I walk past that old room at the back of the house, and I think about how sometimes the hardest decisions a parent makes are the ones that look the most like cruelty from the outside, and how real love isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's just the thing that stays, no matter what it costs you. That's our story. Please share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you were in my place? For more stories like this video, and make sure to subscribe to F Tales. See you in the next video. Take care.